Hello, everyone. Today I'm joined by Sandy Hinden. Sandy Hinden is a peace advocate who's worked on projects like Mutually Assured Survival and what we're discussing today, a plan to ensure everyone has access to clean water through a massive network of desalination plants. Please welcome Sandy Hinden. Sandy, how you doing?
Okay, very good, Ronan. Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me to speak with you.
Oh, well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
So you have this massive vision to combat global drought. And as we've seen from the last few years, as climate change has accelerated, people are rapidly losing access to clean water around the world. This is no longer something that seems to be happening in the developing nations of the world. If we're looking at the UK, for example, they're encountering the worst drought they've had in at least 500 years. This is a serious problem, and we can only expect this to grow exponentially. So please, can you give a brief overview of your solution?
Yeah, well, I had this thought about, it's almost 10 years ago that we needed more water around the world. And I knew that there was going to be rising seas. I knew that by the year 2000, by 2100, there could be 5 to 7 feet of rising seas. So the idea was initially to use that water. I was just playing with the idea, playing with the numbers, and seeing if it was possible. So I put together a proposal. I had been doing a lot of work in the previous years with the United Nations Environment Program and different projects around the world. So I always like to think big. So I thought of the concept and I put it together and I sent it to my congressman, and he didn't have any ideas for it. He didn't think it. He didn't actually. I don't think he was really thinking about the world of the future the way I was.
Wait, hold on. You're seriously telling me a politician was not thinking about the world of the future?
Yeah, right. So
I'm shocked.
Yeah, I know. So they're thinking usually in terms of 2 years or 4 years, their next election, and that's it. So I was asking him essentially to think about, at that time, like 90 years, 90 years into the future. Forget about it. So like, I'll show you what the proposal is. I'll walk you through it. It's very simple. It's only one page, and then we can discuss it.
All right, sounds good.
Here we are. Okay, so the idea was to have 1,000 large-scale desalination plants and water pipelines. I wrote, as global ice melts on sea and land, it is estimated the seas will rise by 7 feet by 2100. This would cause flooding of island nations, sections of port cities, such as New York City, of San Francisco, suburban areas near beaches, railroad lines that go close to the water lines, to the seashore, that goes up the New England coast. There's a lot of railroads that are close to the water, and airports near the water. There'll be massive economic damage, and global migration will be caused by that massive flooding. So I had a solution that maybe global desalination plants and pipelines might be helpful. So phase 1 would be a computer modeling for desalination. The solutions begin by creating a computer simulated model of how much water can be used constructively if 1,000 or more, and I called it synergistic desalination plants, because I included desalination plus water pipelines plus electric turbines that could be within those pipes, where if they were constructed around the world to take up the rising seas. That was the original intention, was the rising seas that I was focusing on.
What do you mean by take up the rising seas? Would this in some way mitigate them, or would this take advantage of them?
Mitigate. It was, I had no clue how much water we could use up. So that's where the the computer modeling needs to occur. You need some advanced center where they do computer modeling to actually try to figure that out, if it's useful or not. And so the water then could be used for agriculture, forestry, drinking and cooking. And the desalinated water can be channeled through adequate aqueducts or pipelines into the dry interiors of countries for agriculture, forestry, drinking, and cooking. So the idea was to create like aqueducts or pipelines, and then have turbines, that would the water would pass through those turbines to generate electricity. This is all hypothetical. So,
Well, I mean, aqueducts have proven themselves to be a very effective way of channeling water. I mean, there's ones the ancient Romans built that are still in use today, which I don't understand how, our road system needs to be replaced like every 3 years. And yet, we're still using stuff the Romans built to channel water.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. So then alternative energy production would also occur in this through installing turbines for water to pass over. There is the possibility that water can also be partially used to generate electricity. The way it's done with dams, that's what they have in a dam. These hydropower dams are produced the electricity that way by water passing over those turbines.
I really love that idea because, it has all the advantages of a dam, but doesn't seem to have any of the environmental impact.
Yeah, right. So then the next phase would be financial support. If you could figure it all out make it work, you need engineers to figure that out and computer modelers. So a project on this scope and scale would require political and financial resources of nations, institutions, and private investors. And then the third phase would be the actual design and construction. Once the engineering model is understood and the financing secured, you could begin design and construction. So I did recently an update to look at what's going on with desalination. So these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 articles that people can look at. The first one that I had read, these two, the bottom ones, I read about these years ago, and Israel proved that desalination era is here. So they're producing so much water that they're actually selling water in Israel. And
wow. Are they selling it internationally? Like, has water become an export of theirs now?
Well, I know they're selling it to I believe they're selling it to some of the Arab nations that are local there. So that has to be further researched. This was an article, it must be about 5 years old, maybe. And then I read another article how Israel has used innovation to beat the water crisis. Now, so they have, and then there's this reverse. Let's see, is this one recent? Oh no, this is newer. The older one talks about new methods, new technologies that they were using that were improving desalination, because what happens is salt, I think can clog up the filter systems. So they needed new systems. And then there's also what do they do with the salt, that is gathered in the brine? So it's like a waste product. So that has to be dealt with. And then these are more recent articles. Breakthrough in reverse osmosis may lead to most energy efficient seawater desalination era. That's a 2001 article. So then there's the few other articles that I just recently noticed about the drought that's going on. I think I noticed about the drought in France and, problems in France. And
oh yeah, and the hunger stones
and in England, there's a drought going on now. And in China, you have tremendous drought. So I think the time has come for more serious exploration of desalination plants worldwide. And I'm hoping people will do that. If anybody is interested in contacting me about that, I'd be happy to talk with them and encourage them to go forward with that. And that's about it.
Well, as I mentioned before, I think these droughts do highlight a serious need for this kind of project. I mean, I believe, in Germany, a bunch of the rivers have gotten so low that it turns out like people from 500 years ago, the last time this rivers were so low, people left stones that were like saying, hey, if the river's this low, you're in serious trouble. I believe one of them had instructions to, quote, cry if you're seeing this stone, which is very concerning. So I think the need for this kinds of project is very important. So in terms of, pulling this off, like, would you need a larger government body like the United Nations to kind of coordinate an effort like that? Or would this happen under more private control?
I think that it's private, that you would need some kind of like person who really understood the severity of the problems that we're in right now, and had access to funding, like large amounts of funding, and could run a computer simulation first. That would be the first step, to check out the model that this is really possible. And so maybe what would you need for that? $1 million, maybe, to run a full-scale simulation. And then once you did that, then you could run a pilot project someplace. But it would be great if there was a desalination think tank, where we could gather the great people who are thinking about this. So that might be a good concept for somebody who has a lot of resources, who's an entrepreneur and is a futurist, a future thinker, and somebody like Elon Musk, with that type of willing to put money into creating something for the future. So
do you think though? Oh, sorry.
I saw recent pictures of China, the parched land there just cracking. This was farmlands that were like rice fields and just totally dried up. It was astounding. So something really needs to change now.
Do you think that there is potential for this project to not be as effective as it potentially could be under more of like kind of a privatized framework? I know a lot of water companies don't necessarily have ethics at the top of their priorities. I remember the head of Nestle basically described water as not being a human right. Do you think those drawbacks could potentially impact a project like that?
Well, it's hard to say. I've seen the problem of bureaucracies of government-run projects. It's hard to get anything started, through bureaucracies, and eventually, where are they going to get their funding from? I just recently read an article about the United Nations Development Program, and they were in Brazil, and they were being accused of actually supporting the oil industry. And it was in Brazil. It was South America. I forget which country it was. And they were, I wrote about it a little bit. It's on the Evolved Leaders for Mutually Assured Survival website, and it's under the Save the Earth game. So there's a section in there about the criticisms of the United Nations. And I wrote about, there was an article in the New York Times a few weeks ago about the United Nations Development Program. Essentially, they get their money from donors. They're not funded by the way other United Nations agencies are. So they're funded by private donations. So therefore, they become susceptible to influence. And in this case, it was by the oil industry in the, no, it was the oil industry. Yeah, the oil industry. And so there's concerns that even the United Nations can be influenced, by existing powers that are not working for a sustainable planet. So it's a tough thing. It's tough to get the money from large donors who are, ethical and have integrity and have real consideration for the planet. So I don't know. I don't know the solution. I don't know where we can get the kind of funding that's needed.
That I completely understand. This usually tends to be kind of the biggest issue with this type of project is, our economic system almost seems to hinder advancement in this kind of respect.
Yeah, there's no incentives for running idealistic projects. That's one of the problems. That they're, with the present economic system is not a system based on. I also do a lot of research on other economic systems, as you know, from my work with Doughnut Economics, and also I'm looking to meet with the well-being economy people and to explore possibilities with them. So I have that monthly program on Doughnut Economics on the second Sunday of the month. I run a program for them on bioregeneration and reimagining what we need on Earth. So,
it's a great program. And I think for a lot of projects like this, really reimagining the economy is a key component, in my opinion. I don't believe that a lot of the massive transformations required to not only stop climate change, but survive it, are quite frankly going to be possible in a large enough scale in our current economic system.
Yeah. So your project as well deserves a lot of attention and a lot of support. So I'm looking forward to having you on that program on that second Sunday in September to talk about what you're doing. It was also great projects.
Oh, thank you. I'm very excited to discuss it as well. So yeah, you mentioned Doughnut Economics before. Could you quickly explain kind of like what that economic model looks like?
Yeah, and so here's a donut. There's an inner part, the hole in the donut, and the outer part of the donut. So they use the donut. The outer part is the boundaries of the Earth's needs, essentially. The needs for water, the atmosphere, the biosphere. So they have about 9 indicators around the outside. And if you overshoot the boundaries of those, you get into trouble with the Earth. On the inner core is the human needs and social needs, and there's about 10 indicators in there. And if you undershoot those and you don't fulfill the needs of the people and society, you run into trouble. So basically it's the needs of society and people and the needs of Earth on the outside of the donut they're using as a model. And we're in trouble in many of those areas, and many of the Earth's needs are not being met, and many of our human and social needs are not being met. So I have a proposal on the Mutually Assured Survival website that shows we need to actually demilitarize by 10%. If we could get global demilitarization going with 10% military reductions each year, and using those funds for Earth's needs and for human and social needs, then we have some possibility of creating a sustainable planet. Otherwise, we don't have the money to fulfill Earth's needs and human and social needs. So we have to demilitarize before we can actually create a sustainable planet. That's what mutually assured survival is that there's a connection between Earth's needs and human and social needs, and the needs. So we have the needs for peace, and we have the needs to take care of nature for Earth's care. And that's what mutually assured survival is based on: nature and people and humanity. And so if we fulfill those needs, then we have a chance of creating a sustainable planet. If we don't, there's no chance of creating a sustainable planet.
I really love this line of thinking. And, you know, it kind of reminds me of what I was mentioning earlier about the aqueducts and the Romans, because the Roman army, you know, they had shovels and pickaxes in their hands as often as they did swords. And that's because they assigned their armies to build infrastructure, maintain it, all this other stuff. And I think armed forces could potentially have this part to play in a project like yours.
Yeah, well, it certainly could. You have the Army Corps of Engineers is an example of that. And they are actually doing a survey, a study right now of the, I think the Atlantic seaboard in the United States to recommend seawalls being built on the Atlantic coast, probably on the west coast as well. And so they're looking at where seawalls need to be built right now.
Really, that's disheartening to hear, but I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah, it'll take about 2 more years before that report is produced. Otherwise, you're going to have massive flooding all along the Atlantic and the Pacifics, you know, and you're going to have massive flooding all around the world.
Well, I mean, we basically already have. I mean, a third of Pakistan as we speak is underwater. I believe about 30 million people have lost their homes over the flooding that took place over the last few days.
Yeah, I just found out I didn't realize that was from a melting glacier.
Yeah, just one glacier did all that, which is incomprehensible, really, when you get down to it. I mean, like, that's just one thing of ice, and there's so much more that's under threat of melting. I remember recently that it was announced that, you know, a lot of what's happening in Greenland right now, a lot of the melting that's occurring is going to lock in a certain level of sea rise, a minimum of about a foot.
Well, this is where everything gets to be so complex and so difficult to figure out, because if you're going to have the melting of the ice there, and you're going to have glacial melts, you know, for that is on land, and so you're going to have rushing water there, and so would that nullify, you know, any aqueducts that you built, any water pipelines, or would it destroy any of that? So everything is so complex right now. You know, they call it, these are wicked problems, they call them in systems science.
I love that term. That's a really good, yeah. I love that term. I've not heard that before.
Yeah, that's so complex. There's so many moving parts to things. I have a model that shows like a cascade of crises that we're facing. You know, one will impact the next, and the next that will impact the next, and so we're facing multiple crises.
Well, this is, I think, the essence of what makes climate change such a daunting challenge. Is at the end of the day, it is just 100 different issues all feeding into each other, making each other worse. And this is, I think, what makes the Doughnut such a great model, is it can really highlight the interconnectivity of these issues in a way that's very easy to digest.
That's right. So we should put a plug in there for people to join us on that second Sunday of each month at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So figure out your time zone for that, and have people join us, you know, because we need to figure this out. And that's why it's a monthly group also, because we can build, it's almost like we're a think tank, you know, without walls, that we're just connecting with each other to explore possibilities.
The more the merrier, the more viewpoints, the more disciplines, the better. Because at the end of the day, I can't think of a more intersectional issue than climate change.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thinking in regards of these rising sea levels, this really also, I think, highlights another reason for why your vision is so important, in the sense that, I saw this when I was in West Africa. Rising sea levels are destroying any agriculture near the coast because it's causing salt to intrude into the soil and it's destroying fresh water supplies.
Yeah.
So, throughout history, we've seen that, like, when people can't farm, they can't eat. And when a society can't eat, it collapses.
Yeah. It's one of the things that I saw as just as a pipe. If we could desalinate water, let's play make believe. Like, say we had so much water that we desalinated, we didn't know what to do with that water. We had so much, and say it could actually add to the lowering of the rising seas. Imagine we keep drinking up so much water that it's actually stabilizing the rising seas. Well, where would we put that water? You could use water for households and, well, for sanitation, but if there was still excess water, how about pumping them into deserts? Bringing a pipeline into a desert area, and then just letting the water go there, creating lakes in the deserts.
See, I love that as well because, a lot of the deserts around the world, whether it be the American Southwest or the Sahara, they weren't always deserts. Human activity throughout history essentially reduced them to that. And if we could pump in water and ensure there's constant, like, ready supply of it that is accessible to nature, that could do a lot to regenerate and undo those thousands of years of damage. So, I love your thinking here.
Yeah, so they're right. I had once read that there was forests in the Middle East. That there have been, and I think during the Roman period, they actually caused deforestation they cut down so many trees.
This is 100% correct. I mean, the region is called the Fertile Crescent for what it used to be, not what it is now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really kind of amazing. Like, yeah, the amount of damage, we've done to the planet, this is my whole area, is immense. And, I'm really seeing, talking to you, there's a lot of potential for a project like this to really help undo that damage.
Yeah. Could you imagine? Maybe that's where some of the money could come from the oil producing nations in the Middle East. And maybe if they focused on water rather than oil, and then reforested the Middle East. Could you imagine the Middle East being reforested with desalinated water? What a wonderful!
I love it. I love it. I love it.
That would be. Wow. Okay, so let's continue this thinking, and let's continue to keep working together, and who knows? You never know if we can make connections. One organization that might help with something like this is Rotary International.
I'm not familiar with them.
Yeah, Rotary is an international organization that has 1.4 million members, and it's got maybe 50,000 chapters, 50,000 clubs around the world. And they are essentially business people in the local communities that do good things for the local communities. They have water projects, they create wells, and they help, they were responsible for the eradication of polio up until recently. They
help. Yeah, that's back now. Yay.
Yeah. But they helped originally get rid of that, and so they do many different kinds of projects. But if they took this on as a possibility, maybe they could fund some research into this. So that just look up Rotary International, and they have a foundation that maybe does funding for things like this. That would be maybe they would be good with this. I have a couple of friends that are good with. We're close and work closely with Rotary, are in Rotary, so I'll ask them about it.
So outside of, agriculture and environmental restoration, do you see any other potential applications for a project like this?
Let's see, agriculture, we said, and maybe forestry, reforestation, they could use that water. It could be used for, the water was certainly good for cooking and sanitation and drinking water. So
Well, that is a serious issue around so many parts of the world. I remember, as I mentioned before, when I was in West Africa, there was a family I spent a lot of time with. They invited me to dinner to their place all the time, and they were very poor. And, I'd never been to a place that didn't have running water before. And that was a complete shock to me. I remember right before dinner, instead of washing my hands at a faucet, they gave me a kettle and I just kind of had to rinse my hand with that. So, say again?
no, I said, wow, that really, that, yeah, so that it could help for sanitary reasons also.
Yeah, it shouldn't come as a surprise that, the day after I end up being very sick for a few days, which
Wow.
I do wonder if there was a connection there. But at the end of the day, yeah, I think, in terms of sanitation, yeah, there has to be huge implications for that there, especially, yeah, amongst a lot of these coastal communities in Africa who just don't really have much access to clean water, despite being right next to the Atlantic.
Right. So so then there's 4 areas. So it's agriculture, forestry, sanitation, and cooking. Cooking water for cooking. So those are 4 areas that we could use all that water. So that's,
Yeah. No, oh, sorry.
no, I think that's about it. And let's we'll continue to keep researching it to see if any new possibilities come along.
Sounds great. And thank you so much for taking the time to come on here. Links to all of Sandy's projects will be in the description below. Sandy, before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, just thank you, Ronan. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for being the next generation of doing this work. And we're passing the torch on to you and to keep this going. So let's continue to collaborate.
Sounds great. Till next time, Sandy.
Right on. Thanks, Ronan. Bye-bye.